of power, which is what's been going on century after century and getting ever faster. And this is what they're looking for: a world government that would dictate to every country, a world central bank that will control world finance, world currency, eventually no cash, no currencies, physical currencies, just electronic money, one world electronic currency. One world army that would impose the will of the world government, a microchip population where children are microchipped at birth as a matter of course, and then at least 4, possibly more, but at least 4 super-state unions under that. The European Union evolved out of a free trade zone. The American Union evolved out of another free trade zone, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Pacific Union, Asia and the East, evolved out of APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and the African Union, which they already have, which was evolved out of the Organization of African Unity. And the idea is there, the next stage, nation-states are to be broken up eventually into regions to de-unify in a unified response to that edifice of power above, and at the bottom of that little lot come the people. That's what they want, because then people can sit around one table in the world government and dictate to that whole pyramid of power. So that's where they want to go, but just keep in mind that what this is really going on in the background. That's the physical expression of it. It's stopping people realizing their consciousness, pulling them into that, manipulating the virtual reality they decode, and therefore experience. Okay, once upon a virtual reality. This is one reality that leads us to where we are now. And I've got to go real quick through some of this because there's a hell of a lot of dots to connect in this section. Eons ago, there were, it seems, great landmasses, civilizations in the Atlantic and in the Pacific called Lemuria, or Mu, and the one in the Atlantic, Atlantis, which went down amid great cataclysmic events. Some people say around 11,500 years ago, some people say much further. And certainly when there's a great book called When the Earth Nearly Died, which I read many years ago, where these two writers and researchers put together the legends of people all over the world. I mean, the so-called Great Flood and all that stuff, it's not just in the Bible, it's in every culture in the world. And they put all those legends and descriptions of what happened alongside the geological and biological evidence which you can find around the Earth, and they found that they correlated with incredible synchronicity. They told the same story of great cataclysmic events, and of course the most famous one is the story of Noah. But the story of Noah is just a rewrite of a story told thousands of years before, and indeed all around the world, where the Noah figure is given a different name in different cultures. So many of the Bible stories, the vast majority of them, are just much older stories which were rewritten. They put the new heroes, name for the heroes, and they put it in a different historical setting and time scale, but they were just the same stories. Before this great cataclysmic time, which I call the schism, if you look at the ancient accounts, they describe it as a golden age. It seems to be a time of harmony, and a time when the way that humans interacted with the world and each other and reality was very different. When, from our point of view, people lived for fantastic ages, and it was a time of harmony. And then came this, what I call the schism, which took many forms. And one seems to have been an energetic schism, which brought about this geological catastrophe, which brought an end to that very, very advanced civilization or civilizations called Mu and Atlantis, which appear to be in many, many ways further ahead, much further ahead technologically than we are now. And this energetic schism, and something else that I'll come to, a genetic schism, manipulation, changed the nature of life in this reality from one of harmony and connection, where we were in this world but not of it, to one where life changed and became very, very much more primitive. And if people think, well, evolution can't go back, it can only go forward. Well, imagine today if there were enormous geological events which made it impossible for us to have electricity or use oil and all these things we take for granted. Look at what happened in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. It was basically back to every man for themselves, a dog-eat-dog kind of existence for some time after that, because all those services we take for granted and things we take for granted disappeared. Imagine if you had a massive one on a virtually global scale, if not global scale, and that all that other stuff came to an end. It would go back to a kind of a primitive existence, and then the memory of the very advanced time would just be a memory, and increasingly a memory, and it would just be carried in stories, and more that time, what we call time passed, this mind construct called time, they'd think it became like fantasy and just legend and myth. That's what would happen now if it happened today. And in the Bible it talks about the fall of man, and how suddenly life changed for humanity in this Garden of Eden. Now, we talk about the Garden of Eden in the Bible. The Garden of Eden is mentioned in tablets from Sumer, in what we call Iraq, thousands of years before Christianity. The Garden of Eden was just a rewrite of them. It goes back much further. Now, a lot of these very advanced Atlanteans and Lemurians or Muans moved out of those lands before and as a result of the cataclysmic events, and they located in other areas. And they took with them this advanced knowledge of reality and all the rest of it to these other lands, and it took on, it went in its own way. From that original one knowledge, it went into isolated areas as eventually the world recovered from the cataclysms, and it went off in its own way, but it was still the same basic knowledge. And some of the areas where, long after this cataclysmic time, advanced societies started to appear, these are some of them, and the knowledge reimplanted itself, but went off and was expressed in different ways. My friend, the Zulu shaman, Credo Mutwa in South Africa, a couple of times he threw the bones for me. And throwing the bones, they're carved bones carved into symbols. And because everything is energy, when you carve something to represent something, or you make something to represent something, whether it's a picture or a symbol or whatever, it resonates to that energy field, to that frequency that it represents, because everything's energy, everything's consciousness. So when you put your hands over these bones in the basket before he throws them, what you're doing is connecting your energy field, which carries the blueprint of you, subconscious and conscious, into the energy fields of those bones. And where those bones are going to fall when he throws them in relationship to each other is already decided before they're thrown by the magnetic connections that have been made. And he throws them. And he reads where they are in relation to each other and all the rest of it, in terms of trying to read the future and all that. Whether you agree with that or not, that's not the point. But I thought when he did it, this is just throwing the rune stones in Europe. It's exactly the same thing. It's just picking out the tarot cards. The reason you pick out this tarot card and not that one is your magnetic field makes a connection to the magnetic field of that card, which represents a certain symbol, therefore a frequency, and you pull that one out and not that one because of that magnetic connection. Well, what I'm saying is, all over the world, there were different ways of expressing this knowledge, because now we had isolated societies, at least for a time, instead of the one society we had before. And this knowledge that came out of these advanced civilizations, that was the knowledge massively advanced, even from where we are now, some of it, that built these inexplicable, fantastic ancient structures. I mean, this is in Peru. These are hundreds of tons. You can't get a cigarette paper between them. I mean, what do they do? Latin, was it, on their back, put pulled by ropes? I mean, what's going on here? It was fantastic what they did. These are the Nazca lines in Peru, where you can only see these depictions of animals and insects, which are all one line scored in the surface of the earth, at 1,000, 2,000 feet. And they were only seen in their entirety, when people started flying over them. So they were quite obviously, this very advanced knowledge in the ancient world. And some of it survived in some areas after the flood, the catastrophe. And these are some of the early states of the old world. They call it the old world, but actually it was the world recovering after the cataclysmic events. And this area of Mesopotamia is particularly important to the story I'm going to tell. And in these areas, and in many other areas, in fact, if you really go into it, every other area of the world, they tell a story which is repeated in the Bible, in Genesis. And where did Genesis come from? It came from ancient tablets from ancient Sumer in what is now Iraq and was also Babylon. A provable fact, because when you decode these, translate these tablets found in what is now Iraq in the 19th century and since, they tell stories that are in the Bible long before anyone had heard of Christianity or the Bible. And this is a key one that is repeated using different words and different names all over the world. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were old, men of renown. Now this story of an interbreeding between a non-human race, which were perceived as the gods, and humans creating hybrid bloodlines, is universal all over the world. And it certainly can be found in enormous abundance in the Indus Valley, now of course called India, that area, and in Sumer, which also became Babylon and what we now call Iraq. There they tell the story in the Sumerian tablets of the Anunnaki, who the gods as they were perceived to interbred with humans, creating these hybrid bloodlines. And the purest of them became known as the royal bloodlines. And it was this interbreeding that led to this whole idea of the divine right to rule. The divine right to rule, what does that mean? It means the right to rule because of your bloodline, because of your DNA, because of your computer program. We have a head of state in Britain, Queen Elizabeth II, who is only head of state because of her DNA, because of her family bloodline. That's how you become head of state. Now, how did this come about? It comes about way, way back from the idea that these bloodlines were special because they were the bloodlines of the gods, not the divine right, the bloodline of the gods. And the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is just vastly, anyway, a rewrite of these Sumerian stories, which came about when the Israelites were held in captivity in Babylon for, 70 years or so, when they got access, and the scribes and the Levites, etc., got access to these Sumerian stories. That's why the story of Moses being found in the bulrushes, etc., etc., is a rewrite of King Sargon from Mesopotamia, thousands of years earlier, which the same story was told. So this land, the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, which became Sumer, an incredibly advanced culture. It's what even mainstream historians call the cradle of civilization, but it wasn't. It was the re-emergence of some sort of civilization after the cataclysmic events. And Sumer kind of came out of nowhere very, very fast. Didn't kind of build up to it, or there's no evidence of that. It just came out of nowhere and later became Babylon, and it's now Iraq. Now, these bloodlines that came out of Sumer, these hybrid bloodlines were seeded all over the world, but these ones here really are, from my research over 20 years anyway, the real important ones in terms of the bloodlines and the families that are in control of the world today, or are trying to be in complete control. They've not made it quite yet. And the invasion of Iraq is not just for oil. It's not just for this, it's not just for that, it's for many, many reasons combined. But one of them is, it's this land, Mesopotamia, is of immense historical and spiritual, as they perceive spiritual, importance to these bloodlines, because that's effectively where they came from. And these bloodlines, I mean, humanity was affected by this interbreeding as it expanded out, of course, but there were key ones that were much more pure, in the sense that the genetics of the gods was much more powerful within them than the general run of the population. And over the centuries, these bloodlines moved out, where they became the kings and the queens and the rulers, wherever they went, out into northern Europe. And they were the bloodlines that created the Roman Empire. Wherever these bloodlines went, empire. There was the Babylonian Empire, there was the Roman Empire. Then they located massively in Britain, and we had the British Empire, and so on. And the French Empire, because they peopled the whole of Europe. Now they became the European royal families and aristocracy. And still are those that remain, but as they were the aristocracy all around the world, the Habsburgs, for instance, are among these bloodlines. But when people started reject over control by royal dictatorship, these bloodlines, although some stayed in over royal situations like the royal family of Britain, etc., most of them moved out into what I call the dark suit professions. They became the politicians, the lawyers, the bankers, the business people. And they controlled that way. But they are still to themselves royal bloodlines, the bloodlines of the gods. And as they expanded through the British Empire and the other European empires, they expanded the bloodline all over the world. It existed all over the world anyway, because of this interbreeding was global, but these particular Sumer ones were very, very important in terms of the royal lines. And they had the colonies all over the world in their various forms. What then happened was there was a sleight of hand which appeared to be good for the people, but actually not the way it works out. There's two types of control. There's a control you can see, touch and taste: communism, fascism, apartheid, whatever. And in that situation, at least the people know where they stand. They're in a situation where they have no freedom, and they can see at least one level of who's denying them their freedom. And in that situation, you can know where you stand, and you can respond and rebel because you know where you stand. The greatest form of control is the control you cannot see, touch or taste. Symbolically, it's sitting in a prison cell, but you can't see the bars. We have a version of that called democracy. And what happens then is people sit and cook and don't rebel about not being free because they think they are. But covertly, their choices and their ability to express their uniqueness and infinity and potential is fundamentally controlled, even though they think voting every 4 or 5 years means they're free. And so when the bloodlines apparently, or the European empires apparently withdrew from the colonial situation, the colonial control, what they did was left out in those countries the bloodline and the secret society network through which the bloodline manipulates itself or its agents and front people into the key positions of power. And what they created as a result of that, and what is certainly massively there now, is a secret society version of a transnational corporation. The center of this corporation is in Europe for historical reasons, and operational level anyway, because there are other parts of the world where there are also deeper levels of this organization. So you have the headquarters, and in each country, United States, Croatia, Britain, whatever, there is what you might call a subsidiary company. These are secret society networks, and their job is to control that country's government, any political party that has any chance of becoming the government, the banking system, the business system, media ownership, etc. And so when the headquarters dictates the global agenda, these networks in different countries then proceed to introduce that agenda in their sphere of influence. This is why, as I go around the world, indeed you've only got to go on the internet and follow the news, you see the same things being introduced in different countries that apparently have no connection, with the same excuses being used to justify them. You know, they've had a protest here, the students, over fees for education. Well, what they've done in Britain and other places is exactly the same, except we're further ahead. There's now young people leaving college and university, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds, already in debt to the banks to pay for their education, which means those young people's choices are immediately kind of limited, because they now have to serve the system to pay that money back, because they've been put in under the great control mechanism called debt from the earliest of ages. The idea is to make, my goodness me, are we seeing it or what, to make every country interdependent on every other country, so no one country or one region has independence from the global system over which that country or region has no control. Any independent country, they're trying to pick them off, and they are picking them off. And so what you have is these bloodlines, which the secret society network goes under the term of Illuminati, the illuminated ones, where they use a name at all, that is. When you see all these companies and corporations around the world, they have different names, but ultimately they're controlled by the same families, and they're one corporation. And the idea is to put humanity in a prison of surveillance, control, and microchipping, and limitation of potential and choice that means that they become nothing more than slaves to this elite on a scale which even now we haven't even begun to see. Well, now it gets bloody interesting. I love this bit. So, who are they? Who are they? Who is this non-human race that all these ancient cultures and legends talk about, interbred with humanity to create this hybrid bloodline and indeed change the genetics of the human form? Well, over the last kind of, I guess, 10, 12 years, this information started to come in, and it's come in all over the world now. The key ones seem to take a reptilian form. And, of course, we decode a tiny frequency range within infinity, and we think that we know it all. And because it's different to what we are used to, then it can't exist. It must be crazy. It's an interesting fact that if you want to control people's perception of what's possible, then you just limit the information they receive about what is possible. It's real simple. And then they'll believe what's possible is what they've been told is possible. And so they will dismiss by reflex action, laugh and snigger at something that is happening just because it's different, because they're stuck in mind. Now, DNA is a software program. It holds different information, just like different software programs do. And this hybrid DNA, this reptilian human DNA, shall we say, the royal bloodlines and the other effects on all of us, although lesser than the pure ones, is a software program which is information, which therefore affects not only the way we perceive reality, it affects the way we decode reality. And I would say firewalls the computer in the way I was talking earlier. And it's interesting, the fall of man, symbolically, was caused by what? A snake. And what, you know, I was on a Christian radio station last year, and they were going on, this reptilian's a load of rubbish. I said, really, do you believe the Bible? Oh, I believe the Bible. I said, well, do you think the snake in the Garden of Eden, the serpent in the Garden of Eden, was literally a snake talking to Adam and Eve? Do you actually believe that was exactly what it is? Or do you think it might be symbolic for something else? And it kind of did make some of them think, oh, well, hold on a second, yeah. And it's funny how, you know, people dismiss some of the things that people think because they're crazy, and then again, it's cognitive dissonance. They don't look at what they're saying. I'm not saying they shouldn't believe it. Believe what you like. It's a human right. But, I mean, please look at your own beliefs before you start writing off others as crazy. And what this interbreeding did was affect the human DNA, and it put a bigger reptilian input into it. And interestingly, the caduceus, which is now the symbol of the medical profession, is a symbol of the DNA and enlightenment, kundalini and all that stuff, and it's symbolized as snakes. And the snake symbolism and the serpent symbolism around the world is absolutely unbelievable. Before I got into this, I wasn't aware of it, but of course you do research and you follow it through. The serpent symbolism in religions and cultures and bloodlines and origins of kings and queens all over the world is absolutely staggering. This is a painting of one of these reptilian entities from ancient modern descriptions, although there are many versions, just like they are humans, by Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, who I'll get to shortly. And this is a symbolic painting by Neil Haig of this hybrid bloodline. And they became known also as the demigods, you know, part human, part god, because of this interbreeding. And this change in the DNA, again the snake, did something to the human form and its ability to connect. I would suggest, the more that I go into this, and I'm gathering more and more information all the time by the day now, it seems to be this area is coming into my life a lot. It's like firewalling off a computer to limit what it can perceive and decode. And for me, the fall of man, as it is described, was a fall down the frequencies, or at least a fall down the range of frequencies that we could perceive as a matter of course. Because, of course, you'll see cats and other animals reacting to what is to us empty space. What's the cat doing? There's nothing there. Well, there is to the cat, because it's got a wider visual frequency range it can access. It sees more than we do. That's why it's reacting to what is to us empty space. And this firewall affected, because it was affecting the DNA, which is the receiver-transmitter, and the crystalline system also, our ability to decode reality. And therefore make it more difficult to hold a connection to consciousness while we're in this mind reality, this virtual reality. And so for me anyway, I mean, people just have to make their own minds up on this stuff, it's just information. The exclusion from the garden, symbolically, something else that you find around the world, not just in the Bible, long before the Bible, the exclusion of Adam and Eve from the garden was the exclusion from realities that they could, that humans could access before, because Adam and Eve is symbolic of a human form. They're not kind of individuals necessarily. Now, the worship of the serpent, official, mainstream science and anthropology, is the oldest form of worship. It's been taken back so far 70,000 years, which certainly fits, and then some, with the Sumerian tablets timescale of when the Anunnaki came. These tablets connect the Anunnaki to their kings going back 240,000 years. Because this golden age wasn't, you know, a week on Tuesday and within an hour in the month. It was a long period of life on Earth, which history has shut out, official history. And 70,000 years ago, people in South Africa, what are called the Sand people, the Bush people, Bushmen, were worshipping the serpent as a god. And all these different groups in these different cultures, when you go into it, you go, oh my goodness me, you had no idea till you look at this, how universal this was. The Druids, they worshipped a serpent god called Hu. And so Hu-man actually translates in that interpretation as serpent man. And the under different names, the serpent gods and the serpent god are just universal. Now, in the same area where Sumer, this very advanced civilization, appeared around 4000 BC, something like that, through to 2000 BC, around then. Before that, in the same area of Mesopotamia, was something called the Ubaid people, the Ubaid culture. And in their graves have been found these serpent images of their gods, and many of them are holding babies, like the mother and child, which will become maybe interesting later on. It's also interesting that these reptilian gods were supposed to have elongated skulls. And again, as seen in that image from the Ubaid period, thousands and thousands of years BC. And there have been skulls found that have this incredible elongated skull. And there's another one there, the skull that was found. And the Egyptians, for instance, among others, they depicted their gods and goddesses with elongated skulls. Now, of course, there are people, again, another one, with the big hats, the high hats, the elongated skull that you see so often in Egypt. Now, you do find this among some native peoples, where they take the children and they bind their heads, I mean, God, the thought of it, so tightly from a birth, and it elongates the skull. And when they're asked why they do this, they say, and Craig and Muchwood told me a lot about what goes on in Africa from that point of view, they say it's to make our children like the gods. Again, it's this carryover from the gods with the elongated skulls. Now, one of the ways that they symbolized these bloodlines and these gods as part human, part snake was like this. You see loads of these, where it's part human and the rest is like a snake or a serpent. These are kind of endless numbers of these images all around the world in different cultures. And here's another example, where you're human and then you are part serpent. This is the hybrid bloodline that I'm talking about, symbolized in ancient architecture, etc. You get the symbolism of the people, humans, fighting giant snakes. Again, all symbolic. There again is a goddess who becomes, in the lower half, a snake. There you get the story of humans fighting the snake and all the rest of it, symbolic of this. Again, the cobra and the symbol of the cobra is an Illuminati symbol in many ways. And going way back, it's a symbol in Egypt, where the cobra is symbolized in the way that they symbolize their pharaohs, etc. Says here, beard styled to resemble underbelly of cobra, cobra emerging from the top of the head, headdress like the cobra. And wherever you go, and I've been researching this now for the best part of a decade, it's unbelievable. And the other interesting thing, because of where we're going, is at least there came a time, if not from the start, when the worship of the sun and the worship of the serpent kind of became one and moved as one unit. It's like the reptilian hybrid religion, the worship of the sun and the worship of the moon goddess, etc. Again, here we have the cobra symbol of a god or goddess in another part of the world. And you see them all over the place. And somebody sent me these statue images, again, of the symbolism of the serpent and the human woman, the interbreeding, and the dual hybrid nature, part human, part serpent, part human, part serpent. And these gargoyles that you see on the stately homes and castles of these elite bloodlines, again, symbolic of these entities. The dragon or the serpent you find as a regular symbol on the coats of arms of these families. The crest of the City of London. By City of London, I mean the financial district of London, the original London before it became the great sprawl it is today. That is the two flying dragons holding the red cross on the white background, which is the shield of the Knights Templar secret society, which is massively part of this network of secret societies. It's a closer look at it. When you go into the City of London, you pass these flying reptiles on both sides of the road holding those shields. At the point where the City of London meets something called the Temple, and it's called the Temple in London because it's named after the Knights Templar Temple, where those two very important areas of London meet in terms of global control and manipulation, you have this big reptile in the middle of the road at a place known as Temple Bar. Again, the dragon and the serpent monster and all the rest of it is universal around the world. Of course, in the East, like in China and Japan, etc., it's the national symbol, the dragon. And the ancient Chinese emperors used to claim the right to be emperor because of their descendants from what they called the serpent gods. Again, it goes on and on and on. Messiah comes from Mesa, apparently, according to some researchers, and Christ means anointed one. And the Mesa is the crocodile, the Nile crocodile, and they used to use the fat of the Nile crocodile to anoint people in ceremonies in Egypt, and that oil is still used, the symbolism of the oil, and so much Middle Eastern and Israel symbolism and names and what have you when we crown the monarch of Britain. In the Bible, the Satan figure, whatever you want to call him, is described in dragon terms, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now that great dragon, the druid god Yu, was known as the great dragon ruler of the world to the druids. So Credo Mutwa, a great friend of mine, when I first met him, was in South Africa in the late 90s. I think it's about 98. And I met him and we had a chat. And we haven't talked about any of this stuff, but other things. And then I went back just after I'd published a book called The Biggest Secret. And he's on the phone as soon as I get there saying, I must talk to you. How do you know about the Chitahuri? Who the hell are the Chitahuri? Well, the Chitahuri, because The Biggest Secret was the first book I wrote where I introduced this whole reptilian theme. The Chitahuri in South African legend are the children of the serpent or the children of the python. They are this hybrid bloodline known as the Chitahuri in South Africa. And I talked to him, and I did a DVD of about 6.5 hours talking to him about this. And he's telling me all the African legends that he learned in his development as a shaman over like 50 years or more. He's in his late 80s now. And they mirrored what I was finding out all over the world. And he showed me artifacts he had, like this necklace of the mysteries, as he calls it. Not really a necklace. It goes on the shoulders, and it's so bloody heavy. I don't know how at his age he bloody walks around with it, but he does sometimes. And on the necklace of the mysteries are these symbols through which he is the official storyteller of the Zulu nation and the official historian of the Zulu nation. He tells the story of the development of people in Africa, African people. And the pride of place at the front is this human woman and this clearly non-human entity with a big willy, which, he told me, used to be golden until someone stole it and they couldn't afford to replace the gold, so a copper one was put in its place. Now that, from South Africa, mirrors the story, the big story at the heart of Egyptian myth, of the golden penis of Osiris, which was also told, in effect, about Nimrod, the Osiris figure in Babylon, who I'll certainly come to as we go along, because it's very, very important to understanding so much about what's going on today. And these stories are relating, that he tells from the legends, of an interbreeding between a non-human race, the Chitahuri, and human women to create a hybrid bloodline. There's the human woman, there's the non-human entity. Now, why does it look like that? This is the reason why, at best, these entities and their hybrids are symbolized by snakes and animals, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, because, according to legend, the Chitahuri said, to the people, you must never depict us as we really look. So what they did, they used kind of snake symbolism, or they made them look absolutely ludicrously not human, to show that we're not talking about human interbreeding, but non-human human interbreeding. Now, on the side of Credo's hut, he has painted this picture of a snake eating a human from African legends about the Chitauri eating humans. And it's interesting that you find that on the Alfa Romeo symbol alongside the red cross on the white background, which is the Knights Templar Secret Society. And in the garden of Silvio Berlusconi, the leader of Italy, God knows how, were they all drunk, you have the same thing of the snake eating a human. This is from ancient myth about the Chitauri. Now, a lot of these fairy stories about frogs turning into princes and all that stuff are all linked to these kind of legends about this interbreeding and this hybrid race. And it's amazing what you find. This is a book in America, I think a series of books, someone was telling me, but certainly one book for children. It's in the schools, and it's about shape-shifting reptilians between human and reptilian, which these bloodlines, in their purest form, mind, can do. And, you know, throughout history and cultures all over the world, you see, not just reptilian, but in many different forms, you see the story of shape-shifting. Now, when I started meeting people all over the world, I mean, I don't go looking for this, but I started meeting people from about 96, 97, who all over the world, who were telling me stories about how they'd experienced seeing someone who looked human and turning into a reptilian figure and then going back again. And you think, hold on, year one or two, you go, ooh, not sure about that. So you stick it on the back burner, and as I do, and I wait and see where it goes. Well, where it went was loads of other stories around the world of the same thing. Now, this is why the first part of today was so important, because if we don't understand the nature of reality and its illusory physicality, then, you know, people say, you can't go from physical body to physical body and back again. No, you can't. I absolutely agree with you. But that's not what happens. The only place the shapeshift happens is in your head, in the decoding system. When you have an energy field shift, then you are decoding an energy field like, you know, the energy form into the holographic form, and then when that energy field shifts, which is not solid, it's movable because it's energy, then you start to decode a different form of that energy. And to your perception, you see a apparently solid body human, then you see it reptilian, sometimes other forms as well, and then you see it human again. And of course, without understanding the nature of reality, you go, that's impossible. No, it's not. It's all gone on in your head. It's just like flicking a television channel zapper button from one to another. Now, oh, hey, that's kind of relevant, isn't it? She should come up. I'm not getting a knighthood, by the way, in Britain. I think it's when I said she was a Satanist, shape-shifted reptilian. I think that cost me in the end. I'm not sure. So the physical form is a hologram. It's not solid, and that's why it can shift if you know what you're doing, because it happens in there within this short frequency range. So these entities, these reptilian entities, appear to exist just outside, as a matter of course, outside of visible light. So in the natural course of events, what we're decoding is that which exists within visible light. So we see humans everywhere. But just outside of visible light are entities that are anything but human. And this is where we see ghostly figures too. The reason a ghost looks ethereal rather than solid is it's not quite on the same frequency that we are. So when you get two radio stations that are not quite on the dial, you don't get sharp reception, you get what we call interference. This is a visual version of interference. And if we were on the same wavelength as the, quote, ghost, it would look as solid as you and me do. But because it's not, it looks ethereal. And this is a thing that has been a constant theme through this period since this subject entered my life. And that is psychic people whose visual acuity is outside the norm, who've told me how they've seen reptilian-type, ethereal-type entities connected to people in human form through these lower two vortex points, what we call chakra points. And of course, one of the great themes throughout history and ancient peoples, right up to today, is that of possession. Possession by demonic entities that take over a person's mental, emotional, and therefore physical responses, perceptions, etc. And I started to understand why this hybrid DNA, these bloodlines were necessary. These entities operate just outside of visible light. As I said earlier, if I'm going to interact with this reality, I need a form within this reality to interact with it. So what they've done is created hybrid bloodlines which have a vibrational resonance because of the genetic makeup to these entities, which means they can make a vibrational possession with these particular bloodlines much more powerfully than they can with the general population, which all of us have tremendous reptilian genetics. I'll get to in a minute, but these bloodlines are, and then some. And so this seems to be the game. You use your secret society network to manipulate these hybrid bloodlines into power, and as they go into power, what's really going into power is the entity possessing the physical body. But because we're only decoding reality within the visible light spectrum, when we look at these people, we see physical bodies. We see human George Bush. We see human Queen of England. But if you could just tease out, just beyond visible light, you would see overshadowing these people something very, very anything but human. And so these people that end up in these positions of power, a lot of them anyway, are vehicles. And so these are what I call come and go politicians who just come and go and all the rest of it. But all they are vehicles to allow these entities to manipulate this reality through their outer vehicle. So you have the politicians in the dark suits, then you have the shadow people, the advisors and all those people that have the real power in human form. And then you have behind them these entities that operate just outside of visible light and possess these entities and control their mental and emotional processes. And one important thing to stress, which will make a lot of sense of the world, is that one key aspect of this hybrid DNA, this pure one, this one that's more reptilian than general population, is that they don't have the most important balancer of behavior, and that is empathy. If I have empathy with someone who's going to suffer the consequences of my actions, that empathy stops me taking those actions. If I do not have the ability to empathize because that has been deleted from the program, then anything goes. Starving children in a world of plenty because of the way I manipulate the economy, I have no emotional consequence for that because I have no empathy with those people. Same with kids killed in Gaza. Look, it's gone back to Vietnam and before, and bombing cities full of civilians. To us who have empathy, wouldn't even consider it horrific, grotesque, my God. But without empathy, there is no emotional problem whatsoever. And so what we're looking at seems more and more clear to me is that these particular bloodlines that end up in the positions of power and behind the positions of power are possessed entities. On one level they're human, but if you could see further on, they'd be anything but human. Someone sent me this picture off the internet with this kind of reptilian eye. I'm not saying it might be just the light, whatever, I'm not saying that, but I'm using it as an example. So many people have told me how they've seen people's eyes shift like that into a reptilian form, which seems to be the first thing to go. But full body shifts are ridiculously common around the world, but of course not many people talk about it, because what do people say? You're mad. Now, I've got a friend who's an associate of an expert in iris development and all the rest of it in terms of the technology. I don't agree with it. The technology that uses your iris to read your code so you go through airports without going through the various checks and everything. Anyway, whatever. This guy who was doing this, he looked at 2,300 pairs of eyes as a result of researching this technology. He has no idea that my friend is a friend of mine or what I'm talking about. What he said to my friend is what surprised him greatly when he did this research and when he's looking into eyes through microscopes, etc., is that of the 2,300 eyes he scanned, around 4% appeared to be of reptilian type and appearance. George Bush, somebody sent me that one. Again, it might be the light, probably is, but it's very symbolic. And again, you know, we've got the Queen. Somebody produced that on the front of a magazine in Britain to, you know, ridicule me. I thought, thank you very much, I'll use that. And again, symbolic, but all these bloodlines, these royal bloodlines, that's again a depiction of someone from royalty in the ancient world with a cobra again. It's like the serpent and royal bloodlines go hand in hand wherever you go. There's Dick. There you go. Oh yeah, another thing, people who've worked with satanically abused people who've been put through satanic ritual and satanic abuse and ritual abuse, a number of them have written to me, and one of them sent me these drawings with his client's permission, of course. What they do is they try to get them to bring out their inner memories and the suppressed, blocked memories of what happened by drawing. And this lady drew images of what she's experienced during these rituals. And again, they draw reptilian eyes and reptilian people. And again, the idea of possession, and often possession by reptilian entities, goes way, way, way back. Because the DNA is a software program, and the idea is to hold that software program by only interbreeding with your own kind. This is where this obsession with elite bloodlines and royal and aristocratic bloodlines, and now the elite business and banking families, interbreeding with each other. Not through love, but through genetics. And because once you breed out of this bloodline, this pure bloodline, very quickly that software program is diluted so that it doesn't behave in the same way. So Neil Haig did that one of Tony Blair. So you look at these people and you see the human level, but what's behind them? Behind the painted smile, behind the eyes. This guy, I had an amazing experience with him before I was into any of this, which absolutely showed me that the world isn't what we thought it was. When his eyes flipped, back in 1989, when I was not into any of this stuff at all, I wondered what the hell I was looking at. Ted Heath, he was the man who, more than any other politician in Britain, took us into the European community that became the European Union. And he's a Satanist and child killer, and I've said that publicly in Britain. He's dead now, but I said it long before he died, and I'm still waiting for the writ because it's true. What's behind these people? We see the human level. Oh, she's not even shifting, look at them eyes. Eh? Which one's the reptilian there? Now, this man, Carl Sagan, very famous cosmologist, very respected in the realms of academia, etc., he wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden, which looked at the influence of our reptilian genetics on human behavior. And he says in there that you cannot understand human behavior without looking at the reptilian aspects of the human form. Because a key major part of the human brain is known by scientists as the R complex, or the reptilian brain. Goes down into the brainstem here. And from this part of the brain, of course that's balanced out by other parts of the brain, But from this reptilian brain, this is mainstream science I'm quoting now, not, sitting in a darkened room. From here we get primitive and emotional responses. It is our primitive and emotional responses that allow the few to control the many. It's they that override rational, conscious thought so that we react to fear stories and manufactured crises with emotional responses that then give people permission to offer the solutions to those problems. Oh! Swine flu, get me a mask! Emotional response. Rational response, they played this scam 3 years ago. It's a load of crap. And so, other parts of this reptilian brain give us cold-blooded behavior and territoriality, wanting to own, control. A desire to control, an obsession with hierarchical structures of power. There are no group of people on this planet more obsessed with hierarchical structures of power than these hybrid families. From the reptilian brain we get a regression, the belief that might is right, winner takes all. This is mainstream science I'm quoting here. Why? Because they have far more of this genetics than the general population, and therefore they're influenced much more by it. What is the reptilian brain about? Survival. Now there are some good things about that, because it allows us to survive and keep the body alive so we can experience here a bit longer. But when that becomes the focus of our perception, that we have to keep surviving, what does that do? It moves us, in terms of our perception of reality, into the reptilian brain. Global warming, reptilian brain. Terrorism, reptilian brain. Fear of the future. What's going to happen to the kids? Reptilian brain. Survival. The survival mechanism, or the reaction to danger that psychologists call fight or flight. Hit the guy or run. All from the reptilian brain. Emotional responses. Primitive emotional responses. Now this society is structured with its manipulation of events and perception to put the population in the reptilian brain for much of their existence here. Be afraid, be very afraid, because the big monster's coming as soon as we've invented him. Reptilian brain. Terrorism, reptilian brain activated. Global warming, reptilian brain activated. Swine flu, reptilian brain activated. They control us through reptilian genetics. And it's my increasing belief as I research this, that this interbreeding was to infuse reptilian genetics into the human form more powerfully than it was before, and therefore have the connection through which our reality could be manipulated. We need to get out the reptilian brain. I'll get into that in the last section, because we can. It's domination. I don't mean out of it. You can't just take it away. I mean that is domination. The other thing is about this possession is that, and these entities, is they are energy vampires. They suck the life force out of people, and they are sucking the life force out of this reality. Well, not sucking the life force so much as they are creating events, wars, stress, famine, terrorism, fear of the future, fear of paying the rent, all this stuff. Because when we go into these lower vibrational emotions, we are generating that low vibrational energy. Now, because these are low vibrational entities operating in densities, frequencies lower than this one, they need to absorb energy that is vibrating within their own energy range. So love, heart love, crikey, that's radio 1 to their radio 55. To absorb energy, to vampire energy from this reality, they need people in the mode that is generating energy that's vibrating to their frequency. And they operate just outside of visible light. There's these lower dimensions which, all over the ancient world, they talk about the demonic realms. These are just entities that are so disconnected from pure consciousness that they've completely lost the plot, and all balance has gone. It's what people call hell, symbolically. Even not symbolically, it may appear. And between these dimensions is what an astrophysicist friend of mine calls interspace planes, which are like neutral zones between dimensions. And what happens is, if you want to exist in these interspace planes, you need to create a source of energy for yourself, because there's not energy like there is in a fully fledged dimension or frequency range or density. I asked Credo Mutwa, when this lady told me about interspace planes, I said, have you ever heard of anything in your culture that would match this? He said, oh yes, he said, immediately. We call them the heaven between heavens. That's where the Chittahuri are. And so, as we produce low vibrational energy, low vibrational emotion through all the stuff that goes on in this world, personal conflict, worry, stress, wars, all the rest of it, they are picking up this energy because it's within their frequency range, and they're absorbing it. And it's giving them energy, it's giving them, therefore, power to recycle back against us. And we generate enormous amounts of energy as our emotions and our thoughts change. I spent 5 hours one weekend with a very, very interesting man called Mr. Emoto, a Japanese guy, well, his name would suggest that, wouldn't it, who has done some brilliant work showing what thought and other vibrational influences do to energy. And how he's done this is he gets containers of water, and he'll either write different words of love and appreciation, words of hate. Sometimes he'll put one occasion he'll put a mobile phone tied to them. And what he then does is freeze them very, very quickly. And what he then sees is the crystal, the ice crystals, and how they formed from the water that was in the vibrational state of being in contact. You don't even have to say the words, just writing them on the side in words, that carries that vibration. And he's written and produced many, many books and talks all around the world on this. It's fascinating stuff. This is a crystal from words of love and appreciation. This is a crystal from "you make me sick, I will kill you." It's a completely different energy form. And on a vibrational level, that's the stuff these guys want. Not this. They can't absorb that. It's too high vibrationally for them. It's another one, love and appreciation. That is what happened to the crystal when the water had a mobile phone tied to it. Hello? Anyone want to make a call? And so all these horrendous things that go on in the world are producing an energy generation from people collectively that kind of reminds you of that theme in the Matrix, where the machines were getting their power from human energy in vats of babies, and the Morpheus character said they have turned human beings into one of these, a battery. In many ways, that is what is going on. And how they've done this is to create this structure. You have these entities, these reptilian entities, and the reason I put the word Nephilim in there, because all around the world these entities are called different things, like the Chittahuri. But of course in the Bible, the hybrids from the interbreeding of the sons of God and the daughters of men were the Nephilim. Again, just another name for the same thing. So these entities are possessing these bloodlines in these different countries. These bloodlines end up in the positions of power, and in these different countries, like this global corporation with the headquarters, etc., that I was talking about, they control the politics, finance, media, military, religion, royalty, etc. in those countries, and control the people through that structure. Ultimately, that's where the control is, but it comes down through them. And what these do is they, because these at this level, I tell you, they fight among themselves like crazy. But then when it's getting in the way of the agenda, they get their heads banged together by people higher up. But these really do fight among each other like crazy, because they're obsessed with power and control. Something else that reptilian genetics brings about. Anyway, they play off the people in wars, which these people cause, and we divide and rule ourselves, kill each other, and provide the energy sustenance necessary for them to get more powerful. And of course, these people declare wars, these silly buggers fight them. And if we stopped, the house of cards would come down. The fact that we don't holds it together. We must take responsibility for what's going on. And so the schism people, as I call them, they're the ones that are put in power for a short amount of time to continue with this system and keep this round and round thing going, which is what? It's like the famous symbol of the serpent or the snake swallowing its own tail. Round and round, and we don't break out of the program. For this to happen, we need puppet people. And to keep people as puppets, we need to control all the things I talked about before, education, science, whatever. And we have to have constant instruction, direction, imposition to keep people on the treadmill, on the software program, so we don't lift our heads up and see what the hell's going on. To leave us in bewildered ignorance, a crazy world that thinks it's sane. Now I'm going to go through some of the ways they do this, these bloodlines, as we come down increasingly now into present day. Just getting across a few coordinates to people, which is what I've been doing now for the best part of 20 years, it was up as I understood them, I just pass them on, can make people far more streetwise about the world and what they receive as information and what it's really meaning. So I'm going to go a few coordinates. Coordinates, how a few control the world. Pyramid power, in effect. What you do, you structure society, and my goodness how they have, collectively and in terms of businesses, schools, universities, banks, the lot, as pyramids. Compartmentalized pyramids. So the vast majority of people are down here in the pyramid. They go to work, go to college, and they make their individual contributions. They have no idea how all these contributions connect together to create anything but an innocent picture. Only they know that. And the idea has been, through secret societies, the highest levels of them, is to hoard knowledge and add to it as they go through the generations, only to the chosen few at the top of the pyramid. The bloodlines, effectively, if you get high enough, right up here. And to suck out of circulation that knowledge which they want to hoard. This was the real reason for the Inquisitions and the destruction of native peoples and the shaman of the various cultures around the world. As Credo Mutwa said to me, when the British came into South Africa, they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them. This condemnation of the occult and the paranormal and all that stuff, it's all to